Welcome, listeners, to episode 4 of the Wild Wild West End, a podcast about Galveston County naturalism and wildlife. So, the topic of episode 4 is Cottonmouth, the great moccasin snake. You'll notice that the spelling there on screen, Mockazin, is not the traditional spelling of moccasin you usually see in regards to the water moccasin, which, if anyone didn't know, the northern cottonmouth and the Florida cottonmouth are both referred to as the water moccasin. A cottonmouth is a water moccasin. So this particular cottonmouth right here is one that I photographed at Lafitte's Cove here in Galveston. It's not the typical coloration or markings of a cottonmouth. It actually lacks the dark underchin markings that are one of the field marks of the cottonmouth. And there's an important aspect to that that we'll talk about in a little bit here. Anyway, this was a beautiful snake that I came across there. I named her Queen Lafitte. I briefly detained the snake for many photographs and to check out its ventral pattern, which was lacking. Anyway, this was a beautiful snake. I'm glad to have seen it. It's the most beautiful cottonmouth I've ever seen. More striking than even captive bred, piebald, and albino specimens that I have seen. It was a great privilege to have shared some space with this animal for a little while and walked away, both of us completely unharmed, which is usually the way an encounter with a cottonmouth ends. So back to that spelling. Mockazin, I used that in my title to pay tribute to William Bartram, who was a great naturalist. William Bartram was the son of King George III's royal botanist. And he referred to the cottonmouth as the great moccasin snake in his book Travels, published in 1791. That book details the first North American herpetological survey. It took place in the Carolinas, Florida, and Georgia. So it didn't explore all of North America. It took place over a 4-year period. He documented many plants, mammals, some insects, a number of snakes, and other reptiles and amphibians. So why the different spelling? Unfortunately, that is a thing that we do not know. He actually used 2 different spellings in his work. In the main body of his text, he used the Mockazin. On the plate, the illustration he did of the snake, visible there on the lower right, he spelt it Mockassin. Now, earlier in 1765, the first account of anyone, documented calling a snake a moccasin was done by a journalist who was interviewing a farmer about something, and he mentioned an encounter with a moccasin, which it must have been in popular use at the time for anyone to have understood that article. So sometime previous to 1765, the term was popularized to mean a venomous snake, and probably sometime later became specific to genus Echistrodon. All of the Echistrodons are referred to as moccasins at some time or another. The copperheads of North America are the highland moccasins. The cottonmouths of North America are the water moccasins. And then you have the Mexican moccasins, which occur south of the Rio Grande in Central America, the Taylor's cantil and the bilineal cantil. So just a little background about the roots of the documentation of cottonmouths and the word moccasin. Other than that, we don't know why they're called moccasins. The wordsmith did an interesting article about it in which he came up dry, just like I did when researching this. He was unable to prove out what the origin of moccasin in relation to snakes or echistrodons was. He has a couple of theories which you can look at, but I'm not going to talk about those, mainly because all they are theories. There's absolutely nothing but speculation about why moccasin became related to the North American cottonmouths or the echistrodons in general. So, a little more historical data. In 1966, this map was published, the one on the left-hand side, showing the known range of the cottonmouth in North America. Um, on the right-hand side, you have a map from a study done in 2014. As you can see, these are very similar. People all over the United States outside of this range claim to have seen, killed, encountered, been chased by cottonmouths. There's no truth to that unless it was just right on the edge of that range and you happen to find a cottonmouth a little bit over the border. So this 1966 map, it was actually published in Natural History of Cottonmouth Moccasin Echistrodon piscivorus reptilia by Ray D. Burkett. That was published at the University of Kansas, Lawrence in 1966. Now, the other paper was in 2014, Phylogeography of Echistrodon piscivorus with emphasis on the western limits of its range. So both of these maps detail the range of the cottonmouth, 1966 to 2014. As you can see there, very little changed. So that's all I kind of have to say about that. Is, outside of this range, you are extremely unlikely to encounter a cottonmouth. So let's talk a little bit about the Echistrodon piscivorus identification and field marks. So first of all, Echistrodon piscivorus is, of course, the binominal name of the northern cottonmouth, which is the one we have in Galveston County. If you were in Florida, you would be looking at an Echistrodon conanti, the Florida cottonmouth. But like I said, here in Galveston County, we're looking at the northern. So first I'm going to talk about the field marks you do not see represented in these wonderful graphics that my friend Chris Neubauer did. So the elliptical cat-like pupil is not a field mark that in the snake ID world we use to identify venomous snakes. So why that is when light hits that eye just right, that pupil dilates, and it can be perfectly round when it's dilated. So that could lead to an envenomation by an inexperienced person thinking that they're looking at a non-venomous snake because it has a round eye. Other than that, there are actually several mildly or medically insignificant venomous snakes and some non-venomous snakes that actually have that slit pupil. One, the rosy boa, which is non-venomous. Then the Hypsoglena, the night snakes, all have elliptical pupils, and their venom is really not known to affect humans negatively. They are a medically insignificant venomous snakes, very prey-specific venom. And also you have the northern cat-eyed snake in extreme South Texas that also has a medically insignificant venom, yet has the elliptical pupil. So we don't use that. Also, the one everybody knows is the triangular shape of the head. We also do not use that because many non-venomous snakes are capable of flattening their heads out and having that same general, arrowhead appearance. So we actually do not use those two field marks to identify cottonmouths. What we do use is that diagnostic black stripe behind the eye and continuing through the eye all the way to the tip of the nose there. We definitely, that is a diagnostic field mark. The keeled scales, all pit vipers, which include the Echistrodons, genus Cistrus, and genus Crotalus in North America, all of those snakes have keeled scales. And over there on the right-hand side, you can educate yourself a little bit about what keeled scales are. There are lots of non-venomous snakes that have keeled scales as well, so it's not a definitive field mark, but it is a field mark. That dark under chin pattern is another field mark. So looking at that, you want to use a collection of field marks and behavioral, behaviors to identify these snakes. You don't want to use one field mark alone because that can lead to a bad outcome. So the juveniles of all Echistrodons are very brightly marked and they all share that yellow tail tip. What that is used for is it's a caudal lure, which means they'll wave that tail tip around, and small lizards, skinks, small birds, maybe even rodents will go after that thinking it's a small worm or insect, and they'll become the prey of that young cottonmouth. They keep that tail tip till generally about 1 year of age, and it'll start to fade away. During this time in their life, they also have these cottonmouths have these jagged bands that look kind of pixelated. You'll see there. So those are good field marks for juvenile cottonmouths. As these snakes get older, generally their color is going to dull out, and that pattern might go away entirely, or it might become very faint, and they'll just be a dark colored, large bodied serpent. So that open white mouth right there, that defensive display is very diagnostic of the cottonmouth. There's some other snakes that will do it, but none with the vigor or the success of a cottonmouth. Like that mouth is really bright white. Other snakes, it's not going to be the same. That's a really good field mark for them. So that's just some about the identification and field marks of this snake. Okay, myths about cottonmouths. The first one I want to mention is breeding balls. I'll talk about that. Chasing. Babies are more dangerous, and aggression. These four things are often attributed to northern cottonmouths. So the first one we're going to get into is breeding balls, which is when large groups of non-venomous snakes, the males are attracted to the female's pheromones, and what you get is a big group of, some garter snakes do this as well, genus Thamnophis and genus Nerodia. They're the two most common to do this. Many males will ball up together around a female, and sometimes the Nerodia will do this in the water, and that is referred to as a breeding ball. So there's a very famous scene out of a movie that involves a breeding ball of cottonmouths. So we're going to look at that scene real quick here.
Mockazin!
Okay, so cottonmouths actually do not form breeding balls. It's never been a thing that's been documented. We know that they are solitary animals, except in the rare case that they are either competing for basking space, gathered in a hibernacula over the winter. Sometimes you might see a group of them together after they've just exited their hibernacula, but they're going to quickly disperse, and that is not a breeding ball. Either two males in combat for a female to breed with, or a male and a female actually breeding, which generally takes place on land. Cottonmouths do not gather into breeding balls like non-venomous water snakes. The scene from Lonesome Dove is fiction, and it's really helped to popularize this belief. So like your grandfather's second cousin, your uncle, anyone else, they didn't see it, and no one died by falling into the breeding ball of cottonmouths. If you don't believe me, feel free to do your own search. Find some proof of this somewhere and get back to me with it. I'd love to see it. I can tell you now, though, that there's a reason you won't be getting back to me with that proof ever, with anything other than a second-hand, third-hand, or even better, a 3-generation-old so-and-so saw it story. Don't contact me with that story about your grandfather or your great-uncle. Contact me with a documented event. Talk about the myth that they chase you. As you can see, my friend Caleb Paul here is unconcerned that this cottonmouth is going to chase him. He is photographing the snake from a safe distance while I stand behind the snake with a pair of tongs to keep the snake from fleeing while he photographs it. He's completely at ease with this snake because he knows it's not going to chase him, because it's never been documented. So the myth that is completely false. There has never been a documented case of a cottonmouth having chased anyone. Once again, all there are your grandfathers, your fathers, your uncles' stories about someone seeing a cottonmouth chase someone or having been chased themselves by a cottonmouth. So I work in close contact with these snakes. I work on a wildlife reserve that has thousands of cottonmouths on it. Not one of them has ever chased me. I don't know anyone that's credible meaning a herpetologist, a naturalist, a zoologist, anyone of that caliber that claims to ever have been chased by a cottonmouth. In fact, they all deny that it's true. So I know many professional herpetologists that study snake behavior as a career. None of them has a credible account, a video, a photograph, nothing of anyone being chased by a cottonmouth. That's because they don't exist. This evidence is not out there that I've ever been able to find. I welcome you to try and to get back to me with that evidence. But what you'll find is that there are actual videos of UFOs, of Bigfoot, that are not able to be disproven. But there are no video accounts of cottonmouths chasing human beings that can be considered even remotely credible. And this is despite the fact that we all have high-powered, quality video cameras in our pockets for the last decade, and it still has not been documented. So they don't chase you. I work a lot online in snake ID groups, and there is a subsection of individual that will always claim that cottonmouths are aggressive, that they chase you, that they've been chased. They've never presented any evidence. I have challenged lots and lots of these people to bring evidence, and they have always failed to do so. I have asked them to take me to these areas where cottonmouths will chase you, and so far, no takers. Anybody want to do that? I'm open to it. So cottonmouths do not chase you. I can't really disprove that myth, but there's no evidence at all anywhere of it. So I can say that I strongly disbelieve that. The next thing is the babies are more dangerous. Actually, I don't want to talk about it. I am going to let a video clip tell the story. This comes from a documentary about venomous herpetology, the science of venomous herpetology, done by Ray Morgan, a very talented filmmaker, and he made this documentary. It's a great documentary, and he has generously allowed me to use this clip in my podcast. So I'm just going to play that clip for you now, and I don't really have to talk about it anymore. So everyone enjoy this clip from Ray Morgan's The Venom Interviews.
Younger snakes are believed by many people to be more dangerous than the adults. There's absolutely no truth to that. There's no evidence to suggest it. All the evidence suggests otherwise.
Where they got that misconception from is a lot of babies we've tested are much more toxic than an adult. But their yield is smaller, their mechanism for injecting venom is smaller into the victim. So it's not as more dangerous to the victim. It's just that the venom is different in a lot of juvenile snakes we've tested.
In most rattlesnake species, the babies have more toxic venom than the adults. Why is that? Probably because the babies have to deal with prey that needs to be killed. They don't inject much venom, so they really have to have more toxic venom. As they grow, the adults are dealing with prey that they have plenty of venom to kill, but it needs to be digested. The story is that the baby snakes can't control how much venom they inject, and therefore they inject much more of it. The truth is that these baby snakes have much less venom available than the adults, far, far less venom available. The only study that was done shows they can control it, the release of that venom, just as well as the adults. So there's no reason to believe that part of the story. We know from experiments on strike studies that the adults do inject more venom in predatory bites and in defensive bites, and we know from a number of well-documented studies that snake bites are more severe from the adult rattlesnakes than the babies. I've actually done a study. I looked at newspapers over the years, and I was able to show that this story probably originated in California by the early 1970s, and it remained largely in the California media until the 1990s, when it really took off with the internet. And now it's all over the U.S. I can show from surveys of college students throughout the U.S. that the greatest proportion of individuals who have heard this story and are familiar with it, over 50%, are from the Southwest. Then as you go further east and north, the proportion dropped down to like 15 to 20% of college students having heard this story. Ultimately, millions of Americans believe that baby rattlesnakes are more dangerous than adults. Many physicians and other health professionals believe that babies are more dangerous than adults. And this does create a real, genuine risk when it comes to treating snakebite victims. The risk would be that a physician would treat a bite from a baby snake more aggressively than necessary, and perhaps a bite from an adult snake less aggressively than necessary. Yeah, I think there's a real risk there.
Okay, so the one thing I would really like to add here that wasn't really made clear in this video is that the origin of the entire myth is that baby rattlesnakes were more dangerous than the adults. From there, it spread to all venomous snakes in North America. So that's my only addition to that. Definitely, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the venom reviews in a few minutes, but you can see the information right there on how to go about getting the venom interviews. Like I said, I'm going to devote some more time to it in a little while. So, okay, let's move on to aggression. The chasing is, of course, an aggressive act, which we've maybe, if not disproved, we've challenged. Again, this study done here, I've included a citation at the bottom of the screen there. Those two names might be familiar to you if you listened to episode 3. They wrote a book that I reviewed. J. Whitfield Gibbons and Michael E. Dorcas wrote this paper, Defensive Behavior of Cottonmouths, Echistrodon piscivorus Towards Humans. It was published in 2002, accepted in 2001, published February 2002. They designed some experiments to test the aggression or lack thereof in wild cottonmouths. So you're going to see, when I'm going to read you their abstract, and you're going to hear the term free range cottonmouth in there. That means these were wild animals. They went out and found actual wild animals in the field and ran these experiments on them. So here is the abstract of that paper. Venomous snakes are often perceived as aggressive antagonists, with the North American cottonmouth having a particularly notorious reputation for such villainy. We designed tests to measure the suite of behavioral responses by free-ranging cottonmouths to encounters with humans. When confronted, 23 or 51% of 45 tested tried to escape, and 78% of 36 tested used threat displays and other defensive tactics. Only 13 of 36 cottonmouths bit an artificial hand used in the tests. Our findings challenged conventional wisdom about aggressive behavior in an animal perceived as more dangerous than it is. Changing irrational negative attitudes about venomous snakes is a necessary step towards quelling the recently documented global decline in reptiles. So there you have it. From the paper, Defensive Behavior of Cottonmouths Towards Humans, by J. Whitfield Gibbons and Michael E. Dorcas, really challenged the myth that cottonmouths are aggressive. So that's kind of all I had to say about that. Once again, I have evidence to present that I don't need to give my own account there. Let's talk about young cottonmouths. They look quite a bit different than adult cottonmouths, as you can see. And that's a thing that is a common thread through the genus. Baby copperheads, they look a lot like the adults, but they're going to be more strongly and brightly marked, just like baby cottonmouths are going to be more strongly marked. That pattern is going to fade most of the time in older individuals. And cantiles are also going to be more brightly marked. And a thing that all three of these snakes are going to share is that they're going to have those yellow tail tips that they use for caudal luring. So these are 4 different young cottonmouths that I photographed. The 2 on the left-hand side were both recorded, or both photographed here on Galveston Island. One at Lafitte's Cove, one at the Coastal Heritage Preserve on the west end. Those 2 on the right-hand side, the one on top was photographed in the Turkey Creek unit of the Big Thicket, and is a really good example of how the snake is going to, some coloration is going to match the habitat that it's in. There's a lot of red clay dirt in the Turkey Creek unit of the big thicket. That bottom right snake, that is very similar to those here on Galveston Island, but that one was photographed in the Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge on the Bolivar Peninsula. So those are some young cottonmouths and what you might expect to see with them. So general information. Cottonmouths live in habitats that are generally near fresh water, but not exclusive to that. You can find them up to a mile away from water. They don't strictly need freshwater habitats to survive, other than being able to find fresh water to drink. But they can actually get some of that fresh water from their prey items, so they don't really have to live near water. But they do prefer to. They're actually the only semi-aquatic pit viper in the world, so they do like to be near water. Here on Galveston Island, they're semi-frequently encountered on the beach, so they will swim in salt water. They swam out here and colonized a barrier island, so that's definitely a thing that can happen. They're commonly found in salt marshes here on the bay side of the island, and you can find them in the open coastal prairie out here too. They like an area with some moisture, a field that floods a lot, somewhere with some ditches full of water. They'll utilize about any water source they can. You can find them around stock tanks full of water in agricultural fields. You can find them in ditches. You can find them in a river. You can find them in a creek, a clear running mountain stream, a retention pond, a drainage ditch. Any of these places are good places to find a cottonmouth because they eat a lot of things they eat a lot of things anyway. I'm going to talk about their diet some in a minute, but they are really at home around the water. They're excellent swimmers. Another myth that I didn't really talk about is that cottonmouths float on the top and non-venomous water snakes just have their head above the surface. Cottonmouths are perfectly capable of submerging their entire body and diving underwater, holding their breath for extended periods of time, just like water snakes. And non-venomous water snakes are perfectly capable of floating on top of the water and swimming with their head at a 45-degree angle, like it's supposed to be distinctive of cottonmouths. So don't ever trust those field marks. So you can find these guys in Oakmott's here on the island. Lafitte's Cove is an Oakmott, and there are tons of cottonmouths there, and there's freshwater ponds nearby. It's absolutely a great place to see these snakes. Lots of birders come in contact with them there. So anyway, that's just a bit about their habitat. Defensive display. These guys are real masters of the defensive display. They'll kind of start usually by gaping their mouth at you with that white interior of their mouth. As I mentioned earlier, some other snakes have that, not to the degree the cottonmouth does, though. It's really bright white. They will also rattle their tails. Tail rattling is a thing that's common to snakes in both the old and new world. It's not rattlesnake mimicry. In fact, the closer you get to the genus Crotalus, which are the true rattlesnakes, the faster the tail rattle gets. So phylogenetically, the Echistrodons are only removed one genus. It lies in between Crotalus and Echistrodon, and that is Cistrus, which are the pygmy rattlesnakes and the Massasauguas. So they are not far removed from rattlesnakes phylogenetically. So their tail rattle is very well developed. They can rattle their tail really quickly. They use that to disturb the leaf litter and get your attention, or simply to thrash their tail around, and so you see that motion. So those two things, in conjunction with another powerful deterrent, musking, they have glands inside their cloaca that they can release a very foul smell from. Smells to me like cat urine. Cottonmouths and copperheads and cantiles all, they smell somewhat similar. A lot of people say that copperhead musk smells like cucumbers. I think those people's cats are peeing on their cucumbers. That's my theory there, because it smells like cat urine. They can actually spray that musk in a fine mist like 3 feet. You don't usually see it happen, but you do definitely smell it. A lot of times you'll smell a cottonmouth before you see one. When you have a lot of experience with them, like I do, You recognize that smell pretty quickly. I actually have two captive cottonmouths here at home, um, so I'm well versed in the smell of cottonmouth musk among the musk of many other snakes. I can identify a lot of snakes by the smell of their musk, and I imagine that's a skill that not a lot of people can brag about having. But I have that skill. So just some general information about cottonmouths, some miscellaneous things. 72 inches was the largest cottonmouth ever documented. It was taken to the Philadelphia Zoo after being caught in the wild and measured and documented. Um, that was the biggest. In general, they're going to be, somewhere between 3 and 4 feet. I've actually caught two specimens here on Galveston Island that were one was a little over 4 feet, one was over 4.5 feet, and then I attempted to capture on the Bolivar Peninsula a cottonmouth that I would estimate was over 5 feet long. These are heavy-bodied serpents. They're very heavy, especially large adults. They're big, powerful, heavy-bodied serpents. Despite all of these things I've told you about the myths of their aggression and the baby's more dangerous, all those things, I don't want to downplay the severity of a cottonmouth bite. They don't kill very many people with their bite. So, about 8,000 bites by venomous snakes in North America each year. 5 to 7 of those bites are going to actually be fatal to the victim. Cottonmouths actually, the very low percentage of deadly snake bites in North America come from cottonmouths. I've actually been bitten by one. It was quite painful. The worst pain I've ever experienced was about 12 hours post-bite while I was in the ICU. I'm fine. I came out of it fine. I received 6 vials of antivenom. It was a relatively minor bite, and I'm just fine. It's very rarely fatal to be bitten by a cottonmouth, but it's definitely a medical emergency, and you want to immediately go to a hospital, and you want to receive antivenom for your bite. So I said I'd talk about the diet of the cottonmouth, so let's talk about that a little bit. It's quite variable. They're able to eat many things, and they do that. They eat many different species of fish, probably hundreds of species of fish. They will eat shrimp. They will eat frogs. They will eat birds. They'll eat other snakes, including other venomous snakes, including other cottonmouths. They'll eat carrion, roadkill, anything dead or alive that they think they can consume, they will. They eat small turtles, even small snapping turtles. They've been documented eating young alligators. So there's a book, Snakes of the United States and Canada by Rossi and Rossi. This is the authoritative book on North American snakes as far as I'm concerned. He has an excellent chapter on cottonmouths and their habits, and particularly their diet, in which he goes into great detail and also mentions that he has not covered all the things they are documented to eat. So, yeah, they have a very wide-ranging diet. That's one of their strengths, is that they're a generalist. They can live near fresh water, near brackish water. They can eat almost anything they can catch. They love to eat other snakes, so that's just some about their diet. So cottonmouths give birth to live young, which quickly slither away and go their own way and are fully capable of surviving on their own to an extent. Actually, a really high, upper 90% of most snakes don't survive their first year of life. So lots of these snakes get killed. Everything eats baby snakes, even baby venomous snakes, especially like large wading birds like great egrets, great blue herons, ibises. These things love to eat small snakes and eat many small cottonmouths. So they give birth to live young. Quite a few of them, off the top of my head, I want to say, 6 to 12 young. They can do that twice a year, actually, maybe more than that. They've been noted to breed any time of year with when the climate is right. Down here in Galveston, sometimes we kind of don't have winters, and in Florida it's kind of the same way. So these snakes can they can be observed breeding year round. I believe that Rossi and Rossi noted that in their book as well, and I think that's where I got that information. So anyway, that's kind of a lot of information about cottonmouths. I am going to go ahead and move on here to my media recommendation for this episode, which of course is going to be the Venom interviews. Ray Morgan is a talented filmmaker who made an absolutely wonderful documentary about the work and science of venomous herpetology. It is available to be streamed on Vimeo. You can rent it right now during the COVID-19 social distancing. You can actually watch it for free with the password quarantine on Vimeo. I actually recommend that you just go ahead and buy a copy on Blu-ray from Ray. Hey, how about that? From Ray on Blu-ray. And really support him. He's done some wonderful work here, and everyone that was in the Venom interviews will agree that he did a wonderful job. Ray is kind of trusted to cover venomous herpetology where lots of journalists are not, because they always try to spin the story into a negative light, put words in people's mouths. Ray has done none of that. What you hear is what they said. There's no spin on this. You get the facts about venomous herpetology. So please check out the Venom interviews. Support my friend Ray Morgan, who is, it's just, like I said, a talented filmmaker. So check out the Venom interviews, please. So the wrap up to all this, I once again want to thank Ray Morgan for allowing me to include that clip from the Venom interviews in my presentation. It saved me a lot of breath and more succinctly said everything that needed to be said than I could ever say it. Thanks, Chris Neubauer, for your informational graphics on Cottonmouth ID. Thanks to Southeast Texas Snake ID, where being an outlet for this kind of knowledge on a general basis, that for all snakes, not just cottonmouths. And anyway, everyone, thanks for listening. This has been episode 4 of the Wild Wild West End. I'm your host, Greg Hall. I've really enjoyed recording this episode. Once again, you can read my article on cottonmouths, the great Mockazin snake, in my blog, which you can get linked to through my my Facebook profile. So I hope everyone enjoyed this and learned a lot about cottonmouths. They are one of my favorite snakes. I have a habit of really liking snakes that even snake people, for instance, aren't really crazy about, like Nerodia and cottonmouths. And I have a particular interest in the semi-aquatic snakes of Southeast Texas. So you'll probably get more episodes about those types of snakes. Outside of genus Echistrodon and Nerodia, there are other semi-aquatic snakes that I have yet to talk about, and I'll talk about them eventually. So this has been the Wild Wild West End. Thanks for listening, everyone, and keep the social distancing up. Sounded like Mayor Sylvester Turner right there. Keep the social distancing up, and let's get everything back to normal as quickly as possible. Thanks again for listening. This has been the Wild Wild West End.